Welcome, friends. Tonight I want to start with a simple image. You wake up, open the financial pages, and there it is again. Another hedge fund has gated redemptions. Another high-grade credit fund has temporarily suspended operations. The language is soft. The reality is not. These are high-risk funds blowing up in slow motion. And like Jamie Dimon himself put it, when you start seeing one cockroach in the kitchen, you know there are more hiding in the dark. Let me tell you, we have seen more than one cockroach. We've seen a trail. So here is the question that is now quietly haunting boardrooms and kitchen tables at the same time. Are we walking in to a replay of 2008 as we move toward 2026? Is this the dress rehearsal for another global financial crisis, just with better graphics on the trading screens and more buzzwords about AI and private credit? The talking heads assure you it's all contained. They said the same thing last time. They always do. Because the one thing that must never be admitted on television is that the system itself might be the problem, not just a few bad actors or unlucky bets. To answer that question, we have to go back, not for nostalgia, for pattern recognition. Think about Bear Stearns in the mid-2000s. On the surface, everything looked wonderful. In 2004, 2005, 2006, the share price climbed. Wall Street bonuses flowed. The future was so bright, as the saying goes, you had to wear shades. But then, right around January 2007, the stock price peaked. It didn't crash yet. It just started to slope downward. A little crack in the glass, nothing more. At least that's what they told you. In the middle of 2007, Bear Stearns quietly began shutting down a set of hedge funds stuffed with subprime mortgage-backed securities. The marketing label on those funds, high grade. You see the irony, junk dressed up as quality, risk repackaged as safety. That is capitalism's favorite costume party. And at first, those funds didn't even post catastrophic losses. The real problem came when investors got nervous, asked for their money back, and discovered there was not enough liquidity on the other side. The assets were complex, opaque, hard to sell without making prices fall. So the more people ran for the exits, the more those exits shrank. Forced selling, fire sales, margin calls, and the Bear Stearns share price followed the funds down step by step. Now, why does that matter for today? Because the pattern is eerily familiar. Recently, UBS announced it was closing some of its own high-grade credit funds with concentrated exposure to subprime borrowers and thinly traded assets. Different decade, different acronyms, same movie. One fund gets into trouble, another fund with similar branding but different holdings gets hit anyway, not because its assets suddenly turned poisonous, but because investors have learned the lesson of 2008. No one wants to be the last person left in the theater when somebody yells fire. So they rush for redemptions. And the manager admits, almost sheepishly, that the underlying assets are not very liquid, so they must close the gates. This is where the technical jargon hides the political reality. The modern monetary system is not a pile of coins. It is a web of balance sheets, banks, hedge funds, brokers, shadow lenders, each promising to pay the other under conditions that are assumed to be normal and calm. When a big node in that web, whether it's Bear Stearns back then or UBS in some corner of private credit today, starts to wobble, it doesn't stay local. Perceived counterparty risk goes up. And when perceived risk goes up, the willingness to lend, to roll over funding, to take the other side of a trade goes down. That is what people mean, often without saying it plainly, when they say liquidity is drying up. Here is the key. This can happen regardless of what the central bank announces at its press conference. The Federal Reserve can say it is doing quantitative easing, quantitative tightening, or some new alphabet soup. But if private actors look at one another and quietly decide, I don't trust your balance sheet anymore, then credit creation stalls, spreads widen, funding markets seize. And all of this can be triggered by the failure of a supposedly contained, supposedly high-grade vehicle that the marketing department spent a fortune presenting as safe. The small crack in the dam becomes the story, not because of its size, but because it reveals how fragile the whole structure really is. And here is where the political dimension creeps in, whether Wall Street likes it or not. While these funds implode and redemptions spike, you still have leaders going on television telling you this is the greatest economy we've ever had, floating ideas like 50-year mortgages and fresh rounds of stimulus checks, as if you can patch over structural weakness with ever cheaper credit and one-time cash gifts. The very same politicians who praise the stock market's all-time highs refuse to discuss the cockroaches under the fridge. They celebrate the brightness of the neon sign while the wiring behind the wall overheats. This is not just about one bank, one fund, 1 year. It is about a financial architecture that keeps repeating the same pattern, only with bigger numbers and fancier slogans. History, we are told, doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. In this case, friends, it sounds a lot less like a rhyme and a lot more like a photocopy. And the real danger lies in how quickly a stock trading at $75 can become a stock trading at zero. How quickly contained can become contagion. It's time we face it. When the system needs everything to go right all the time just to avoid collapse, that system is already in crisis. Not with a bang, but with a whisper of closing funds, widening spreads, and quiet panic in the back rooms of finance. Now that we've walked through the familiar shadows of 2007, let's turn the lights onto something even more unsettling, the labor market. Because while hedge fund failures grab headlines, it's jobs, ordinary, everyday livelihoods that tell you where the real economy is headed. And let me tell you, the signals we're seeing right now aren't just echoing the past, they're surpassing it in all the wrong ways. Just last week, another survey came out with results so grim they broke every October record going back to 2003. Challenger, Gray and Christmas, one of the most respected job tracking firms in the country, announced that American employers cut 153,000 positions in a single month. And these aren't cheap, disposable service jobs. Many of them are high-paying, white-collar positions, the kinds of roles people thought AI might nibble at slowly over a decade. Instead, AI is taking a seat at the table and eating the appetizers, the entree, and the dessert all at once. You see, when the top end of the labor market starts cracking first, that's not a soft warning, that's a structural alarm bell. In 2007, layoffs were concentrated in the housing sector, contractors, mortgage brokers, builders. Today, it's engineers, analysts, software developers, corporate managers, the knowledge economy, the very group that was supposed to be insulated from the chaos of automation and global instability. Now they're being replaced by software that doesn't sleep, doesn't ask for raises, and doesn't join unions. And the picture gets darker when you zoom out. Through October 2025, employers have announced over 1 million job cuts up 65% from last year, and the highest total we've seen since 2020. And let's not sanitize what 2020 was. The economy didn't just slow down, it fell into a crater. If today's numbers look like that, then we're already far past the soft landing fantasy Washington keeps selling. Why is this happening? It's not complicated. Prices shot up, wages did not. Revenues stagnated, costs ballooned. That gap, the spread between what families must pay and what they actually earn, keeps widening. And businesses feel the same squeeze. When corporate income can't keep up with rising expenses, CEOs reach for the only lever capitalism always keeps within arm's reach. Cut people, not dividends, not buybacks, not executive bonuses workers. That's the point. The labor market is the front line where inflation meets reality. And right now, employers are saying with their actions what they won't say out loud. The economy is slowing, and we can't afford the staff we hired during the stimulus boom. And then, while families are tightening belts and companies are freezing hiring, you have political leaders stepping in front of cameras saying this is the strongest economy in history. You see the contradiction. The empire insists the banquet is full, while the workers in the kitchen are being shown the door. Even more bizarre, Donald Trump is out there celebrating a miracle economy while simultaneously proposing 50-year mortgages, $2,000 stimulus checks, and the early steps toward universal basic income. Think about that for a moment. If everything were truly booming, why would the government be preparing emergency tools usually reserved for recessions? Because behind closed doors, they can see the numbers you and I see. They know what happens when layoffs spike, while household savings are already drained. They know the consumer, the so-called engine of American capitalism, is running on fumes. So they do what modern central planners always do. They reach for bigger, faster, more extreme interventions. The policies get louder because the system gets weaker. And that brings us to the real fear, not a crisis like 2008, which was sudden, explosive, catastrophic, but something slower, more grinding, more exhausting, a long erosion of purchasing power, job security, and economic stability. A recession not built in the banking system, but in the labor market. A recession where people don't lose their homes overnight. They simply can't afford their lives anymore. This is why the comparison to 2007, 2008 only takes us so far. Yes, the financial echoes are there. Yes, the cockroaches are scurrying again. But the deeper danger lies in the fact that the working backbone of the country is straining harder today than it was back then. We're facing the cracks before the earthquake. And if we ignore them, if we pretend this is a correction, if we keep clinging to the illusion of invincible markets and magical recoveries, then 2026 won't need to look like 2008 to feel just as devastating. Now let's turn the corner toward the part of the story that everyone wants to skip to the prediction. Will 2026 unfold like 2008? Will we see banks collapsing, markets freezing, and political leaders racing to calm panic they barely understand? Before I give you my answer, I want to take you through a small but revealing case that tells us exactly how fragile this moment truly is. And strangely enough, it begins not with a massive Wall Street titan, but with a used car retailer, CarMax. A few weeks ago, CarMax reported earnings that landed with all the grace of an anvil. The stock dropped like a stone from the low 60s to the mid 40s in a single swoop. Why? Because the company admitted what millions of families already knew. The economy is slowing. Wages aren't keeping up, and consumers simply can't afford big purchases anymore. Inventories rose, sales fell, and the illusion of a strong consumer evaporated. It was the Wile E. Coyote moment, running off the cliff before realizing the ground wasn't there. And here's where things get interesting. When a used car dealer says the economy is slowing, Wall Street rolls its eyes. But when hedge funds tied to auto lending start blowing up, when subprime borrowers begin defaulting, when financing companies like Primal Lend stumble, that is no longer a local story about car lots and credit scores. That is counterparty risk creeping into the bloodstream of the broader financial system. One small cockroach scurrying across the kitchen floor tells you nothing. But 5, 10, a trail, that tells you the house has deeper problems. And we are seeing the trail. So I looked at CarMax and said, this is a signal, not because the company is evil, not because used cars are the villain, but because these cracks reflect a simple truth. People are under strain. Workers are losing jobs. Borrowers are missing payments. Banks are quietly tightening lending. Earnings illusions are fading. And so I shorted the stock not as a gamble, but as an expression of a broader thesis. The economy is weaker than the headlines admit. 2 weeks later, the stock fell another 24% in a single day. I closed the position, not to brag, but to highlight something essential. When you see these cracks aligning in subprime auto loans, in employment, in private credit, in hedge funds labeled high grade, you're not witnessing coincidence. You're watching the tide go out. And when the tide goes out, we see who's been swimming naked. And let me tell you, 2025 has started revealing a lot of people swimming without trunks. Now, does that mean we're doomed to repeat 2008? Surprisingly, no. Because while the financial symptoms look familiar, the political response will be radically different. In 2008, central bankers waited too long. Today, they don't wait at all. The moment a chart turns downward, the moment a jobs number misses, the moment a hedge fund coughs, they come running with rate cuts, liquidity injections, emergency lending, fiscal bailouts, creative acronyms, and checks in the mail. Think about it. Donald Trump, who claims this is the greatest economy ever, has proposed 50-year mortgages and new rounds of stimulus checks. That is not confidence speaking. That is fear wearing a smile. That is crisis management presented as growth strategy. So the real question becomes, will the system be allowed to cleanse itself of its excesses, its malinvestment, its reckless leverage? Will we see the painful reset that capitalism tells us is natural? My answer is simple. Absolutely not. This government, Republican or Democrat, will not tolerate a true collapse. They will intervene. They will print. They will borrow. They will stimulate. They will push the crisis forward, not resolve it. And while that prevents a 2008 style implosion, it creates something else, a slow, grinding recession, a 2001 kind of downturn, markets falling hard but not dying, growth slipping but not collapsing, jobs thinning but not vanishing all at once. The danger is quieter, more subtle. It's the danger of stagnation, the danger of a society drifting, not crashing, a recession where the floor doesn't break, you just sink inch by inch. And that's the point. The risk in 2026 isn't a sudden explosion, it's a long erosion, a system that survives each shock by becoming weaker, a political class that keeps the lights on while the foundation crumbles. So no, 2026 won't look like 2008. It could be worse in the long run, not because it's dramatic, but because it's permanent. Because once a society normalizes stagnation, disappointment, and government lifelines as everyday policy, the decline becomes a lifestyle. It's time we face it. The danger ahead isn't the crash, it's the drift, the slow fade of an economic empire struggling to convince its people that everything is fine. Now that we've walked through the cracks fund blowups, labor market deterioration, and the slow turn in consumer demand, let's widen the lens, because the final piece of this story isn't about a failing hedge fund or a struggling company or even a jittery financial system. The final piece is about us, the society living inside this economic machine, and the political class that keeps claiming it's humming along beautifully even as smoke rises from under the hood. You see, recessions, crises, contractions, they don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in a social order. And right now, our social order is stretched thin. On one side, you have ordinary people navigating rising prices, shrinking paychecks, unstable work, and a housing market so distorted that a family can barely rent, let alone buy. On the other side, you have leaders, Trump foremost among them, selling the idea that this is the strongest economy we've ever had. Yet those same leaders are proposing stimulus checks, 50-year mortgages, and massive government intervention. Let me tell you, no administration floats half-century mortgages unless they see a long-term affordability crisis coming straight at them. And that contradiction is the heart of this story. You cannot simultaneously boast about economic strength and quietly prepare emergency tools that only appear before recessions. You cannot praise a booming stock market while pretending not to notice the layoffs that make that boom possible. And you cannot run a society on the illusion of prosperity while the foundation's labor credit trust begin to crumble beneath your feet. But this is not just about hypocrisy. It's about the broader philosophy of the American economic empire. For decades, our model relied on a simple idea: growth solves everything. If the stock market goes up, if home values rise, if consumers spend, then the system works. Inequality? Ignore it. Debt? Just refinance it. Stagnant wages? Make up the difference with credit cards. But now in 2025 and looking toward 2026, we're confronting a world where growth no longer comes cheap. The old tricks aren't magic anymore. Debt is heavy. Rates are high. AI replaces jobs faster than new industries can absorb the displaced. And globalization, the thing that kept goods cheap and profits high, is fragmenting. In other words, the model is aging, the empire is creaking, and instead of confronting that truth, leaders keep turning up the music, hoping no one hears the strain in the walls. Now, you might ask, what does this have to do with hedge funds blowing up or a used car retailer losing market value? Everything, because those events are symptoms of a system that cannot tolerate even the smallest shock without scrambling for stability. UBS shuts a high-grade fund and the ripples travel everywhere. Families cut back on a car purchase and suddenly credit markets feel the pinch. A few subprime lenders stumble and policymakers begin whispering about stimulus. That is not stability. That is fragility disguised as strength. And let's be honest, this fragility is not a partisan problem. It is structural. Trump promises growth, but leans on government money to produce it. Democrats promise stability, but rely on corporate bailouts and financial engineering to maintain it. Both sides fear letting the market do what free market ideology says it must do: correct itself, clear the bad debts, reset valuations, redistribute risk. They fear that process because they know how fragile the system has become, how thin the political patience is, and how volatile the social mood can be when people feel cornered. So instead of restructuring, they improvise, they patch, they smooth over, they extend and pretend. And in doing so, they turn what could have been a short, sharp recession into a long, grinding era of stagnation, something between decline and denial. And that's the danger ahead. Not a collapse that wakes everyone up, but a drift that puts everyone to sleep. A future where the economy never fully crashes, but never fully recovers. Where jobs exist, but pay less. Where growth occurs, but benefits fewer. Where crises spark, but are smothered before they produce change. A future that feels like a permanent holding pattern, circling the runway, running out of fuel, yet never allowed to land. This is not just about hedge funds or housing or interest rates. This is about the direction of a country that refuses to face its own reflection. A nation that clings to the narratives of past greatness while avoiding the decisions necessary for future stability. You see, the empire doesn't end when the barbarians storm the gates. It ends when the people inside stop believing the gatekeepers. It ends when the promises no longer match the lived reality. And if we're honest, we're already there.